Today we're going to be taking apart an HP Omen 15 CE series gaming laptop. This is the CE198WM with the 8th Gen Core i7 and the GTX 1060. So to start out, you're just going to need a small Phillips bit. This is a 2.5. And we're just going to turn over the laptop and loosen or remove the bottom screws. Alright, once you got those bottom case screws out, best spot to start popping that bottom case off is back by the hinge, because it'll leave you kind of a gap to get the tool in there. So we're just going to kind of work across until we get that bottom case to pop up. And then we can just take the tool around and just kind of pop it up from the palm rest assembly. And then the bottom case will just come right off. Alright, so we got a good look on the inside. It looks like most of the components are easily replaceable. It looks like a few screws for the battery. Hard drive caddy is just kind of held in just with a little bit of rubber. Wi-Fi card, RAM, SSD, and the fans and heatsink assembly are all looking pretty easy to get to. So that's good that it's kind of user-friendly and upgradable. So we're going to start by removing the battery. So we're going to go ahead and just take off those screws, and then we can lift it out of the case. So after you pop it up off of the connector, I'm just going to move it a little bit inside to get these tabs out. And then for the RAM, of course, we're just going to spread the little retainers and remove those RAM sticks. And SSD is just one screw. And then you're going to lift it up a little bit to unstick it from the thermal pad. This is an NVMe, and it's the size 2280 if you need to replace or upgrade your SSD. Alright, so for the hard drive, we're just going to flip up on that connector and free it from the motherboard. And then we can push that connector back down. And the hard drive is just held in place by these rubber pieces that kind of compress and hold it in place. And they just pop right out of your hard drive. And then the SATA connector just pops out. Alright, next up we'll do the Wi-Fi card. So you can just push those antennas aside and they'll pop right off, and remove the screw. And then the card will pull straight out of the connector. So it looks like our next step will be to remove the fans and heatsink. It looks like first we're going to need to remove the back covers as well, so we'll go ahead and take out the screws for that. So it looks like there's about 8 screws total, 4 on each vent. So it looks like after we get these screws out, we should be able to wiggle those loose. So just get a fingernail on either side and just pull backwards, and this should free those little vent covers. Alright, now we can start removing these screws for the bracket, heatsink, and looks like the fans will come out separately from the heatsink, but we'll have to find out. Alright, so we went ahead and removed all the screws for the brackets here. So we're going to need to remove that DC jack to get that bracket off. So that connector just pulls straight out of the motherboard. And since we removed the screws already, we can remove that bracket that's covering the heatsink. And same on the other side. Let's remove that bracket. So we just have a few more screws for the actual heatsink holding it down on the GPU and the CPU. So we can go ahead and remove those screws. I don't see any numbers stamped on the CPU part of the heatsink. It doesn't matter which order you remove them, but if you're going to be reinstalling, you want to tighten it in a crosshatch pattern, kind of like a Z shape, to kind of squish that thermal paste down evenly. But as far as removal, it doesn't matter, so we're just going to go ahead and remove all the screws that we see for the heatsink. Give it a little wiggle. Okay, so the fans and the heatsink are definitely separated, so you can replace them individually. We're going to go ahead and wiggle that heatsink a little bit. Sometimes these are held down pretty well with the thermal paste by itself and the thermal pads, so you might need to give it a little bit of encouragement to remove it. So we're just going to kind of keep upward pressure, and then wiggling definitely helps kind of work it loose. And once you've wiggled it free, you can remove the heatsink. Alright, so we already took out the screws for the fans a little bit earlier, so we're going to go ahead and remove that connector. And you're just going to get a couple fingernails on either side of that connector and just wiggle it up. It's a real simple type. It just pops up, and there's a kind of a tab on either side of that connector to get your fingernail on. And we'll repeat for the other side. So it looks like one of the fan tabs is underneath the, looks like the video cable. So we're going to remove that, and to do that we just flip up on that little retainer, and then we can pull that video cable free. Kind of unwind it from the fan, and then we can remove the fan. Alright, so looking at the motherboard, it looks like we're pretty close to being able to remove it. If you need to remove your display, it looks like there's just a couple more screws to be removed to separate the display assembly. For now, we're just going to go ahead and remove all of the ribbons and cables connected to the motherboard, and then we can remove the motherboard. So with this type, again, we'll just flip up on that retainer, and then best practice to flip it back down after you remove the ribbon to keep it from getting broken. Same with the motherboard or keyboard. Touchpad. And the speaker connection is just another simple type. You just pull it straight out. There's a very tiny connector here for the, looks like the power button. Alright, so the connector for the USB board is underneath the motherboard, so what we're going to do is just, we can remove the DC jack, I believe, anyways. Just remove that DC jack to get it out of the way. It just pops up and out. And then we can remove that dual USB board with the motherboard and disconnect it after we've taken the motherboard out of the case. Alright, one last check for any ribbons. I don't see any more. And now we can remove the motherboard screws. Alright, so I think we got all the screws out, and we're just going to free that USB board from the palm rest. The tips kind of stick out, so you got to kind of back it out a little bit as you're lifting up to remove it. Alright, now we can just kind of give the motherboard a wiggle, make sure that there's no more connectors attached. And then as we gently lift up, just going to make sure all those cables are clear, and since the ports on the side of the motherboard stick through the case, we're going to need to pull it back toward us to totally free it from the case. Alright, and then you can see on the bottom side here, it's another flip up type connector for that USB port. I'll go ahead and remove that, and that is how you remove the motherboard. Alright, so we just have a, looks like an SD card board here, still attached to the palm rest. Go ahead and remove that. So it looks like you got to kind of remove that speaker screw to slide that out from underneath. And we're going to be leaving the speakers with the palm rest, so I'll go ahead and put that screw back. Alright, so it looks like a couple screws for the power button, and then we can also remove that. Alright, so it looks like the keyboard is not very replaceable. The backing plate is just kind of riveted in with melted plastic, so if you need to replace your keyboard, I would strongly recommend just replacing the assembly. It does look like the touchpad has some screws holding it in, so that should be replaceable. So now we're going to go ahead and separate the display assembly. I'm just going to make sure that the Wi-Fi antennas and the video card or video cable are nice and loose, so that once we take out those screws for the display assembly, we can easily separate the two pieces. So you just go ahead and open up the display all the way, and then we can remove the hinge screws. And it's best to use your free hand to kind of support the assembly from below. That way when you get to the last screw, you don't have all the pressure just on that one screw, because it can sometimes break the mount. So just hold your hand underneath like so. Looks like underneath the hinge we still need to kind of pull those cables free from the little channels. And then once you get those out, then we can remove the display assembly. Alright, so that looks about it for the palm rest. A couple Phillips screws to remove those speakers, a couple Phillips screws to remove that touchpad. And that is it for the palm rest assembly. Alright, for the display assembly, it's good news on this one. You do not appear to need to remove the display assembly to replace your screen. The bezel comes right off, and it doesn't have any screws that are blocked by the palm rest assembly. So we're going to leave this display assembly complete, but I'll give you a quick rundown on how to open it and replace anything you need on the inside. So the bezel just kind of pops out. There's a line of adhesive pretty much all the way around. So this one, you can kind of grab from the inside if you don't have a flat tool, or you can use a flat tool to kind of pry up until it pops up. And once you have that bezel kind of up, you can see the inside there. You have your hinge rail screws, and then your screen has 4 of these just Phillips type screws, and just the video and the cable unplugs from the back. So if you need to replace your screen and it's cracked, you shouldn't even have to remove it from the palm rest assembly, which will save a lot of time. Just be advised that when you start separating the bezel, you can kind of hear the tape peeling. Most of the models have a decent amount of tape here at the bottom, so you kind of want to keep your hand underneath there and separate it as you're pulling. Otherwise, the bezel tends to rip some of the black plastic off of the bottom of the screen. So that's the only thing that's a little bit difficult about these. But otherwise, yeah, this is definitely an easy screen to work on, easy LCD to replace. And once you get that bezel off, you have just the 4 screws holding on the LCD. You have easy access to the webcam, and it just makes it a lot easier if you need to actually replace your screen. So that is it. That is how you disassemble an HP Omen 15 CE series. This is a CE198WM with the GeForce GTX 1060. So if this video helped you or you found it informative, please like and subscribe. Thank you very much.